Have you ever looked back at a painful betrayal and wondered, how did I not see it coming? When the people closest to you become the enemies you never saw coming. The truth is, toxic people rarely reveal themselves at the beginning. They enter your life wearing masks. They appear kind, supportive, even trustworthy. But while you're opening your heart, they're studying your fears, your insecurities, and your emotional blind spots. Most people don't realize they're being manipulated until they've already lost their peace, confidence, relationships, or years of their lives. That is the real danger. Toxic people do not win because they are smarter than you. They win because they know exactly where you are vulnerable, and they quietly exploit it while pretending to care. The Stoics understood a powerful truth. What you can clearly see can no longer control you. Awareness is armor, clarity is protection. Today, you'll uncover 12 dark secrets hidden by toxic people, secrets they never want you to know. 1. They study your weaknesses before they reveal their intentions. Toxic people rarely attack immediately. They observe first. They watch what upsets you, what excites you, what makes you insecure, and what you desperately want. They collect information quietly. The more they understand your emotional triggers, the easier it becomes to influence your decisions. What looks like interest is often investigation. Most people assume that attention is affection. This is one of the most dangerous assumptions you can make. Just because someone listens carefully does not mean they care deeply. Sometimes they are gathering information. The Stoics understood that knowledge creates leverage, and toxic individuals know this instinctively. When they first enter your life, they often appear unusually interested in your story. They ask about your childhood, your fears, your dreams, your disappointments, your past relationships, your family conflicts, your insecurities. At first, this feels flattering. You feel seen, you feel understood, you feel connected. But what many people fail to realize is that information can be used in two ways. It can be used to support you, or it can be used to control you. Pay close attention to what happens later. Notice how the very things you once revealed in confidence begin appearing in arguments. Notice how your insecurities become pressure points. Notice how your fears become tools. Notice how your emotional triggers are activated at suspiciously convenient moments. That is not coincidence. That is strategy. Imagine telling someone you fear abandonment. Months later, whenever they want compliance, they threaten distance. Imagine telling someone you struggle with confidence. Later, they alternate between praise and criticism to keep you emotionally dependent. Imagine sharing your deepest dreams. Later, they use those dreams to manipulate your decisions. The Stoics taught that self-knowledge is power, but they also understood that self-disclosure requires wisdom. Not everyone deserves unrestricted access to your inner world. Trust should be earned gradually, not granted immediately. Because once someone understands your vulnerabilities, they gain influence. And influence in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. The lesson is simple. Observe how people use information after they receive it. That will tell you more about their character than anything they say. 2. They do not respect your kindness, they test it. Most people believe kindness inspires respect. Toxic people see it differently. They push your boundaries, make unreasonable requests, and observe how much you will tolerate. Every time you say yes when you should say no, they learn that your kindness can be exploited. To them, unchecked generosity is not a virtue, it is an opportunity. The Stoics admired kindness, but they never confused kindness with weakness. Modern society often encourages endless giving. Be nice, be accommodating, be understanding, be available. And while these qualities have value, they become dangerous when disconnected from boundaries. Toxic people understand this perfectly. That is why they rarely attack your kindness directly. They test it, slowly, patiently, strategically. The first request is usually small, something easy, something reasonable. Then comes another, and another, and another. each request slightly larger than the last, each demand slightly more intrusive, each expectation slightly more unreasonable. What are they doing? They are measuring your resistance. They are discovering where your limits are. More importantly, they are discovering whether limits exist at all. The moment they realize that guilt can override your boundaries, the dynamic changes. Now they know how to gain access. Now they know how to influence you. Now they know how to extract more than they deserve. Many good-hearted people become trapped here because they mistake exhaustion for virtue. They believe being constantly available makes them compassionate. But the Stoics would disagree. They understood that a person who cannot say no eventually loses the ability to say yes meaningfully. Because everything becomes yes. Every request, every demand, every obligation, and eventually resentment appears. Not because kindness is wrong, but because kindness without boundaries is unsustainable. Watch how people react when you say no. That reaction reveals everything. Healthy people respect boundaries. Toxic people challenge them. Healthy people adjust expectations. Toxic people increase pressure. Healthy people value your autonomy. Toxic people resent it. The word no is one of the most powerful tools of self-protection. Use it wisely and pay attention to who becomes upset when you do. 3. They rely on your need for approval. If your self-worth depends on being liked, accepted, or praised, you become easy to manipulate. Toxic people understand this. They give approval when they want influence and withdraw it when they want control. They know that people who need validation will often sacrifice their own needs to keep receiving it. One of the greatest lessons of Stoicism is this: the more your happiness depends on other people's opinions, the less control you have over your own life. Toxic people understand this truth, and they exploit it relentlessly. Human beings naturally want acceptance. There is nothing wrong with that. The problem begins when acceptance becomes a necessity instead of a preference, because once approval becomes necessary, independence disappears. Now, your emotional state depends on external reactions. Now your confidence depends on external validation. Now your decisions depend on external acceptance. This creates vulnerability, and toxic people recognize vulnerability immediately. Notice how some people alternate between praise and criticism. One day they make you feel special. The next day they become distant. One moment they offer approval. The next moment they withhold it. This creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates dependency. You start chasing the approval that once came freely. You start modifying your behavior to regain it. You start sacrificing authenticity for acceptance. This is exactly what they want. The Stoics warned against becoming servants to praise, because praise is unstable. Today, people celebrate you. Tomorrow, they criticize you. If your identity depends on their opinion, your peace disappears. True confidence comes from internal standards, not external applause. When you know who you are, manipulation becomes difficult. Because praise no longer controls you. Criticism no longer controls you. Rejection no longer controls you. You remain stable, and stability is something toxic people cannot easily influence. 4. They create confusion on purpose. Clarity is dangerous to toxic people because clarity exposes them. That is why they contradict themselves, change stories, and create uncertainty. Confused people are easier to influence than confident people. If you constantly feel mentally exhausted after dealing with someone, confusion may be their strategy. The Stoics valued clarity because clarity creates freedom. When you clearly understand reality, you make better decisions. When reality becomes distorted, decision-making weakens. This is where toxic people thrive. They create mental fog. They create uncertainty. They create contradictions. Not necessarily because they are intelligent, but because confusion protects them. Imagine confronting someone about a clear issue. Instead of addressing it directly, they redirect. Then they change the subject. Then they bring up something unrelated. Then they reinterpret previous events. Then they question your memory. Then they question your motives. By the end of the conversation, you barely remember the original issue. You only remember feeling exhausted. This exhaustion is not accidental. Mental confusion consumes enormous amounts of energy. When your mind is busy trying to untangle contradictions, it has less energy available for critical thinking, less energy available for observation, less energy available for resistance. The Stoics would advise paying attention to outcomes, not promises, not explanations, not emotional performances. Outcomes. Do conversations consistently leave you confused? Do problems remain unresolved? Do stories constantly change? Do explanations become increasingly complicated? If so, pay attention. Truth simplifies. Deception complicates. Truth creates clarity. Manipulation creates confusion. And often the clearest sign of a toxic person is not what they say. It is how unclear everything becomes whenever they are involved. 5. They want you to doubt yourself. One of their most effective tactics is making you question your judgment. They dismiss your concerns, minimize your feelings, and make you wonder if you are overreacting. The less you trust yourself, the more you depend on them for answers. Self-doubt becomes the doorway through which control enters. The Stoics believed that one of the most valuable things a person can possess is sound judgment. Not wealth, not status, not popularity. Judgment, because every decision you make depends on it. Every relationship, every opportunity, every risk, every boundary. Every path you choose in life is guided by your ability to see clearly and trust your perception of reality. That is why toxic people work so hard to weaken it. They understand that a confident person is difficult to manipulate. A person who trusts their instincts is difficult to control. A person who believes their own eyes is difficult to deceive. So they begin a slow process. A process designed to separate you from your own judgment. At first, it appears harmless. You mention something that bothered you. They immediately dismiss it. You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. You always make things bigger than they are. The first few times, you may ignore it. But repetition changes things. The human mind naturally begins to question itself when enough doubt is introduced. Eventually you stop asking, why did they do that? And you start asking, maybe I'm the problem. This is exactly where they want you. Because once self-doubt enters, dependency follows. Now every concern requires their interpretation. Now every decision requires their approval. Now every feeling requires their validation. The Stoics warned against surrendering your judgment to others. Because the moment you stop trusting yourself, you become vulnerable to anyone willing to think for you. Imagine noticing disrespect, but instead of addressing it, you spend hours wondering if you imagined it. Imagine noticing dishonesty, but instead of responding, you convince yourself you are being unfair. Imagine feeling uncomfortable around someone, but instead of exploring why, you force yourself to ignore it. This pattern is dangerous, because reality does not disappear when you refuse to acknowledge it. It simply continues operating in the background. The Stoics encouraged self-examination, but self-examination is different from self-doubt. Self-examination asks, what is true? Self-doubt asks, what if I'm wrong about everything? One creates wisdom, the other creates paralysis. Toxic people want the second. They want uncertainty. Because uncertainty weakens resistance. Pay attention to how you feel after interacting with certain people. Do you feel clearer or more confused? Do you trust yourself more or less? Do you feel stronger or smaller? These questions matter. Because healthy relationships strengthen your connection to reality. Toxic relationships weaken it. And the moment someone repeatedly causes you to question your own judgment, you must pay attention, because self-trust is not something you can afford to lose. 6. They fear emotionally disciplined people. Toxic people thrive on reactions. Anger, frustration, guilt, and fear are their tools. But when you remain calm, measured, and emotionally controlled, they lose their advantage. They cannot manipulate what they cannot provoke. Your composure becomes their frustration. The Stoics understood something that most people never fully realize. Emotional control is power, not because it makes you cold, not because it makes you indifferent, but because it prevents other people from controlling your behavior. Most manipulation relies on emotional reaction. Think about that carefully. Manipulation rarely works through logic. It works through emotion, fear, guilt, anger, shame, insecurity, urgency. These are the levers toxic people pull. Because emotional people are predictable. When someone knows exactly how to make you angry, they can control your actions. When someone knows exactly how to make you feel guilty, they can influence your decisions. When someone knows exactly how to make you afraid, they can direct your attention. The Stoics recognized this centuries ago. That is why they trained themselves to pause, not suppress emotions. Pause, observe, evaluate, respond. Most people react immediately. The Stoic responds deliberately. That difference changes everything. Imagine someone insults you. The average person reacts instantly. The toxic person wins. Why? Because they successfully controlled the emotional direction of the interaction. Now imagine the same insult met with calm observation. No anger, no argument, no emotional display. Suddenly, the dynamic changes. The toxic person loses influence because the expected reaction never arrives. This is why emotionally disciplined people are so difficult to manipulate. They create uncertainty. Their reactions cannot be predicted. Their emotions cannot be weaponized. Their decisions cannot be controlled through pressure. Toxic individuals often become frustrated around people like this, not because they dislike calmness, but because calmness removes leverage. The Stoics would remind you that emotional discipline is not weakness. It is one of the highest forms of strength. Anyone can react. Anyone can lose control. Anyone can lash out. But remaining composed when provoked requires mastery. And mastery protects freedom. The next time someone tries to pull you into conflict, remember this: not every battle deserves participation. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every provocation deserves your energy. Sometimes the strongest move is refusing to become emotionally available for manipulation, because a calm mind is difficult to control, and a difficult to control person is difficult to exploit. 7. They often play the victim. No matter what happens, they find a way to make themselves appear wronged. They use sympathy as a shield against accountability. If they can convince others they are the victim, they can avoid responsibility for the damage they cause. The victim role is powerful. Human beings naturally want to help those who appear to be suffering. Compassion is one of our strongest instincts. Toxic people understand this, and some learn to weaponize it. The Stoics taught that compassion should be balanced with reason, because sympathy without discernment creates vulnerability. At first, the victim story sounds believable. Maybe it even sounds heartbreaking. Everyone betrayed them. Everyone misunderstood them. Everyone treated them unfairly. Every relationship ended because of someone else. Every problem was caused by someone else. Every conflict was someone else's fault. At first glance, this may seem unfortunate, but over time a pattern emerges. The details change. The names change. The circumstances change. But the story remains the same. They are always innocent. Someone else is always guilty. The Stoics would ask a simple question: what role did they play? Not because every situation is equally shared, but because accountability matters. Healthy people acknowledge mistakes. Toxic people rewrite history. Healthy people reflect. Toxic people blame. Healthy people grow. Toxic people repeat. One of the most revealing moments occurs when you confront them directly. Notice what happens. Do they accept responsibility? Do they apologize sincerely? Do they examine their behavior? Or do they immediately become the victim? Suddenly, your concern becomes an attack. Suddenly, your boundary becomes cruelty. Suddenly, their behavior becomes your fault. This transformation happens remarkably fast. because victimhood protects them. As long as they remain the victim, accountability never arrives. And without accountability, change never occurs. The Stoics believed growth begins when responsibility begins. Anyone who refuses responsibility is also refusing growth, and eventually that refusal affects everyone around them. Be compassionate, but be observant. Listen to stories, but study patterns, because some people genuinely suffer, and some people use suffering as a disguise. The difference becomes obvious when responsibility enters the conversation. 8. They secretly resent your growth. As long as you remain dependent, insecure, or uncertain, they feel comfortable. But when you become stronger, more confident, and more independent, they begin to feel threatened. Your growth reduces their influence. That is why some toxic people become distant, critical, or hostile when you start improving your life. This is one of the most painful truths many people discover too late. Not everyone wants the best for you. Many people want the best version of you that remains convenient for them. The Stoics understood that growth changes relationships, because growth changes dynamics. When you become stronger, people lose access to the weaker version of you. When you become more confident, people lose the ability to control your insecurities. When you become more disciplined, people lose the ability to distract you. When you become more independent, people lose the ability to influence your decisions. Healthy people celebrate this. Toxic people resent it. Pay attention to what happens when your life improves. You start exercising. You start setting boundaries. You start focusing on your goals. You start protecting your time. You start respecting yourself. Suddenly, some people become uncomfortable. Their support becomes weaker. Their enthusiasm becomes forced. Their encouragement becomes criticism. At first, the changes are subtle. A sarcastic comment, a dismissive joke, a negative observation, a strange lack of excitement. Then the behavior becomes clearer. They question your goals. They criticize your decisions. They mock your discipline. They imply you have changed. And in many cases, they are right. You have changed. You are becoming someone they can no longer easily influence. The Stoics would remind you that growth often reveals people more clearly than hardship does, because hardship attracts support. Growth exposes intentions. When you struggle, toxic people feel comfortable. When you rise, they feel threatened. This does not mean everyone who questions you is toxic. Wise people offer constructive criticism, but constructive criticism helps you improve. Resentment tries to pull you backward. Learn the difference. One sharpens you, the other weakens you. And never forget this: the people who genuinely care about you may not always agree with you, but they will never resent your growth, because love celebrates progress. Only insecurity fears it. 9. They test your boundaries in small ways first. Rarely do they cross major lines immediately. They start with small violations, a disrespectful comment, an ignored request, a broken promise. If you tolerate these, they gradually push further. Every boundary you fail to enforce teaches them how much they can get away with. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that betrayal arrives all at once. It usually does not. Major violations are often preceded by dozens of minor ones. The Stoics understood that character reveals itself gradually. That is why they paid attention to small actions, because small actions often predict larger behavior. Toxic people know that if they immediately reveal their full intentions, most people would walk away. So they move slowly, patiently, strategically. The first boundary they cross is usually insignificant. A joke that feels disrespectful, a promise that is broken, a request that ignores your comfort, a comment that feels slightly inappropriate, a small act of dishonesty, something easy to excuse, something easy to overlook. And that is exactly why they do it. They are not testing the boundary itself. They are testing your response. Will you confront it? Will you enforce consequences? Will you speak up, or will you ignore it? Every time a boundary violation receives no response, information is gathered. The toxic person learns something valuable. They learn where resistance is weak. They learn what behavior will be tolerated. They learn how much access they can take without losing privilege. This process continues. The disrespect grows. The dishonesty grows. The manipulation grows. The entitlement grows, not because they suddenly changed, but because the early warnings were ignored. The Stoics believed that small problems should be addressed before they become large problems. A tiny crack in a foundation may seem harmless. Ignored long enough, it threatens the entire structure. Relationships work the same way. One ignored violation becomes two. Two become 10. 10 become a pattern. And patterns become realities. Pay attention to the small things. How do they respond when you say no? How do they react when they inconvenience you? How do they behave when your needs conflict with theirs? How do they respond when limits are enforced? These moments reveal far more than grand gestures ever will. A person's reaction to boundaries often tells you everything you need to know about their respect for you. Healthy people may not always like your boundaries, but they respect them. Toxic people see boundaries as obstacles to overcome, and that difference changes everything. 10. They need your silence. Toxic behavior survives when it is ignored. They depend on your unwillingness to confront patterns, ask difficult questions, or enforce consequences. The moment you begin speaking clearly and setting firm boundaries, their comfort disappears. The Stoics valued truth because truth disrupts illusion. And toxic people depend heavily on illusion. They depend on confusion. They depend on uncertainty. They depend on avoidance. Most importantly, they depend on silence. Silence allows patterns to continue. Silence allows manipulation to grow. Silence allows disrespect to become normal. Think about how many toxic dynamics survive because nobody names them. Nobody asks questions. Nobody challenges contradictions. Nobody enforces consequences. The toxic person becomes comfortable. Not because they are powerful, but because nobody is resisting. Many people remain silent because they fear conflict. They fear rejection. They fear being misunderstood. They fear appearing difficult. The Stoics understood this fear. But they also understood something else. Uncomfortable truth is often less painful than comfortable deception. Every time you ignore a red flag, you postpone a necessary decision. Every time you avoid confrontation, you increase future consequences. Every time you remain silent about harmful behavior, you give it room to expand. This does not mean becoming aggressive. It does not mean arguing endlessly. It does not mean trying to change everyone. It means speaking clearly, directly, calmly, without apology. The moment toxic people realize you are willing to ask difficult questions, something interesting happens. Many become uncomfortable because accountability enters the room. Questions expose contradictions. Boundaries expose entitlement. Consequences expose character. And toxic people rarely enjoy environments where their behavior is clearly visible. The Stoics taught that courage is not the absence of fear. It is action despite fear. Sometimes courage looks like walking away. Sometimes courage looks like saying no. Sometimes courage looks like speaking a truth others prefer to avoid. And often, that courage becomes the beginning of freedom. Because toxic people cannot thrive where truth is consistently present. Their influence depends on darkness. Clarity removes the darkness. And once clarity arrives, their control begins to disappear. 11. They cannot control someone who is self-aware. The more you understand your emotions, values, and vulnerabilities, the less power toxic people have over you. Self-awareness closes the doors they usually enter through. When you know yourself, manipulation becomes easier to recognize and reject. The Stoics considered self-awareness one of the highest forms of wisdom, not because it feels good, but because it removes illusions. Most manipulation succeeds because people do not fully understand themselves. They do not understand their fears. They do not understand their emotional triggers. They do not understand their insecurities. And what remains unconscious becomes vulnerable. Toxic people often discover your weaknesses before you do. That is why self-awareness is so important. Imagine someone trying to manipulate your fear of rejection. If you are unaware of that fear, you may respond automatically. You may seek approval without realizing it. You may tolerate disrespect without understanding why. You may remain in unhealthy situations because the fear operates beneath conscious awareness. But when self-awareness develops, the dynamic changes. Now you recognize the trigger. Now you recognize the pattern. Now you recognize the emotional pressure being applied, and recognition weakens influence. The Stoics regularly examined themselves. They reflected on their thoughts, their actions, their reactions, their desires, their fears. Not because they were perfect, but because they understood that unexamined weaknesses become entry points. The more honestly you understand yourself, the harder you become to manipulate. If you know your insecurities, they cannot easily be used against you. If you know your emotional triggers, they become less effective. If you know your values, external pressure loses power. Self-awareness creates stability, and stability creates freedom. This is why personal growth is so threatening to toxic people. Every improvement closes another door. Every insight removes another weakness. Every lesson increases resistance. The stronger your relationship with yourself becomes, the weaker their influence becomes. Eventually they realize something frustrating. The old tactics no longer work. The guilt no longer works. The pressure no longer works. The confusion no longer works. Because self-awareness has replaced unconscious vulnerability. And that changes everything. 12. Their greatest weapon is your trust given too quickly. Toxic people know that trust is easier to gain than to deserve. They often move fast, creating false closeness, offering excessive praise, or appearing unusually supportive. They want access before you have enough information to evaluate them. The faster you trust, the easier you become to influence. Perhaps the most dangerous mistake people make is confusing familiarity with trust. The Stoics understood that trust should be earned gradually, not because people are guilty until proven innocent, but because character takes time to reveal itself. Toxic people dislike time. Time exposes contradictions. Time reveals patterns. Time uncovers motives. That is why they often accelerate relationships. They create rapid closeness, rapid intimacy, rapid trust. They want access before observation can occur. Think about how often manipulation begins with intensity. Excessive praise, excessive attention, excessive support. Everything feels unusually fast, unusually close, unusually perfect. The Stoics would view this with caution, not suspicion. Caution, because healthy relationships develop through consistency, not urgency. Trust is not built by words. Trust is built by evidence. Evidence requires time. Imagine hiring someone after a 5-minute conversation. You would never do it. Why? Because important decisions require observation. Yet people often grant emotional access far more quickly than professional access. They trust before evaluating. They commit before observing. They believe before verifying. And toxic people benefit enormously from this impatience. The Stoics would advise slowing down. Observe behavior. Observe consistency. Observe reactions under pressure. Observe how they treat people who cannot benefit them. Observe how they respond to boundaries. Observe how they handle disappointment. Observe how they speak about others. Time reveals what charm conceals. The right people will still be there tomorrow, and next month, and next year. Healthy people do not require rushed trust. Only manipulative people need immediate access. The truth is that toxic people are not nearly as powerful as they appear. Their influence depends on secrecy, confusion, and emotional reactions. Once you understand their methods, their tactics become predictable, and what is predictable becomes manageable. This is the lesson the Stoics understood centuries ago. Most manipulation is not magic. Most toxic behavior is not mysterious. It is repetitive, predictable, pattern-based. The problem is not that the signs are invisible. The problem is that most people are never taught to recognize them. Once awareness develops, everything changes. You begin noticing inconsistencies. You begin recognizing emotional traps. You begin identifying unhealthy dynamics before they become destructive. And this awareness creates freedom, not because toxic people disappear, but because their influence weakens. You do not need to fight toxic people. You simply need to see them clearly. Awareness removes their disguise. Boundaries remove their access. And self-respect removes their control. The moment you stop needing approval from unhealthy people, their leverage shrinks. The moment you trust your own judgment, confusion loses power. The moment you enforce consequences, manipulation becomes difficult. The moment you value your peace more than temporary acceptance, your life begins to change. Remember this. The strongest people are not those who never encounter toxic individuals. The strongest people are those who recognize them early. They do not waste years trying to save people committed to dysfunction. They do not sacrifice their peace for false loyalty. They do not confuse kindness with surrender. They do not confuse empathy with permission. And they do not confuse charm with character. The Stoics believe that peace is one of life's greatest treasures. Protect it, guard it, value it, because peace is expensive. It often costs distance from the wrong people. It often requires difficult decisions. It often demands courage, but it is worth every price. Now, subscribe and write this in the comments. I trust with caution. I cannot be manipulated. Before you leave, remember this. The people who can be controlled are the people who cannot see clearly. The people who cannot be controlled are the people who understand themselves. Choose clarity, choose awareness, choose self-respect. And no manipulator will ever have power over your mind again. Now, write this in the comments. I see clearly. I trust wisely. My peace is not negotiable.